Entre l'embardé couronné est mouillé l'ancien paquebot. De tous les réquisitionnés, c'est le plus grand et le plus beau. On l'appelle Lancastria.
This is the 12th of June 2008 and the formal medal presentation ceremony that we held at the Scottish Parliament. This was where the recipients of the medals, which included 6 survivors and around 47 other guests from across the UK and Ireland, travelled to the Scottish Parliament. You can see the survivors down there in the front row, and the presentation was, although it was Scottish Government medal, the presiding officer hosted the event. It was sponsored by Christine Graham, MSP, and we had 150 guests in total there. As I mentioned, roughly 50 medal recipients. This was a major event which had attracted a great deal of interest.
I'm also delighted and greatly honoured to welcome you all to this historic ceremony. This is truly a wonderful...
Fiona Simon, who's the chair of the association, gave some opening remarks as well, and you can see the First Minister gathered there, and myself. And this is the medal recipients in the front row, all listening to the opening remarks in what was a genuinely historic event. First Minister gave a very passionate speech on the importance of the medal and what it signifies in terms of official Scottish Government recognition for the disaster, something which Westminster is still refusing to extend to those who were involved in the disaster. And now we're moving to the first part of the presentation, which was survivor James Coburn, who's living in Shropshire, but Mr Coburn was originally from Leith in Edinburgh. He's 93 years old and served with the Royal Artillery Edinburgh HQ battery at the time of the sinking. He was attached to number 1 HRS Royal Army Service Corps. And the next survivor up was Jim Cowan. And Jim was with the RAF in France before being evacuated through Saint-Nazaire and out onto the Lancastria. Initially he'd been sent below decks, but suffered claustrophobia, so made his way back on top deck, thankfully, and that's what's saved him ultimately. James Cuthbert was 92. He's from Derbyshire and served the Royal Corps of Signals and spent 4 hours in the water holding on to oil barrels before a French tanker picked him up after 4 hours in the sea. And he's pressing the First Minister here on trying to persuade filmmakers to make a dramatisation about the Lancastria. You can see survivor Harry Harding, who's from Salisbury, but originally from Wales, and Harry is 88, one of the more fitter survivors. He was with RAOC, number 1 base depot, and he still owns the wristwatch that he was wearing on the day of the disaster, which stopped when he entered the water. And Mr Harding featured in a documentary for BBC South East in 2000. Lancastria crewman Bill Hughes is 89 years old, and he's from Liverpool, and he's one of the few remaining Lancastria crewmen, and he's fought tirelessly to have the role of merchant seaman in World War II recognised, and not missing a trick, he moved in for a quick kiss with Karen Newton, who was one of the assistants on the evening. Charles Napier was in fact the survivor who gave my own grandfather the life jacket which saved his life. And Charles lives up in Inverurie in Aberdeenshire, which is part of the First Minister's constituency. And during First Minister's question time that day, the First Minister had paid a compliment to Mr Napier. He's been a very long-standing and ardent supporter of the association over a number of years, helping us with media interviews. And Jane Leaper is from Mintlawn near Peterhead. Her father, Ernest Archibald, wrote a very powerful poem about the sinking of the disaster, which is published on the website. Father served with 19 Company Royal Engineers and passed away in 1984.
Mr. Fraser Armstrong, on behalf of survivor William Armstrong.
Fraser Armstrong is from Aberdeen, and his father was told by a brigadier on his return to the UK that the Lancastria sinking, in quotes, did not happen. His father served with the Royal Engineers and he passed away in 1992. Jim Atkins was collecting his medal on behalf of his father, Charles Atkins, and he had travelled from Northampton for the presentation, and his dad served with 73 Company Auxiliary Military Pioneer Corps. Florence Draper was collecting on behalf of her her brother rather, and Leslie George Baker. She travelled up from Devon for the presentation. Her brother was a 19-year-old sergeant with the RAF at the time of his death on aboard the Lancastria, and is buried in La Bernière in Rids. Ian Beattie was collecting on behalf of Tom Beattie. I met Tom some years ago before his death, and Mr Beattie had travelled with his wife up from Wales for the presentation, and his dad was a corporal in the RAF, and in actual fact he grew up in Leith and was stationed in Edinburgh before being sent to France. Thomas Watson was collecting on behalf of his grandfather, who was a Lance Sergeant with the 6th Battalion, the Argyll and Southern Highlanders, when he was killed on the Lancastria. And Mr Watson is actually serves with the 5th Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Scotland at the moment, which had previously been the Argylls. Mavis West was collecting on behalf of her father, George Braidwood, and Mrs West had travelled up from York. Her father, a Lance Corporal, was serving with the 75th Company Auxiliary Military Pioneer Corps at the time of his death, and his body was unfortunately not recovered. Ian Brooke was collecting on behalf of his father, Victor Brooke, and he travelled up from Dorset for the presentation. His father had served with the Royal Corps of Signals and passed away in 2002. Colin Clark's father was a crewman aboard the Lancastria, Thomas Clark, and unfortunately he was killed aboard the Lancastria and his body was not recovered. Mr Clark had travelled up from Chichester and is a former office bearer and active member of the HMT Lancastria Association. Robert Cruikshank had come from Linlithgow and was collecting on behalf of Alexander Cruikshank, who had served with the Field Bakery Unit of the Royal Army Service Corps. And comrades claim that they saw him jump over the side, but he was never seen again and his body wasn't recovered. And Mr Cruikshank knows the First Minister quite well because they used to be former neighbours in Linlithgow. Mel Elcock was collecting the medal on behalf of his father John, who is still alive in fact, but wasn't well enough to travel to Edinburgh. His son travelled up from Leicestershire to receive the medal, and his dad had served with the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. And Joe Fenton was collecting on behalf of Arthur Fenton, who was with the Sherwood Foresters and passed away in 2005.
Entre l'embardé couronné est mouillé l'ancien paquebot, de tous les réquisitionnés, c'est le plus grand et le plus beau.